Hello and welcome to Planet First Action. My name is Ryan Gordon.
And I am Jacob Frost, and we are so excited to have you join us for this second episode of the Thanksgiving special. And speaking of Thanksgiving, Rye, did you partake in any of the traditional festivities?
Man, I don't even know why you were asking. You were sitting at your desk right after dinner, just like me, working away on that laptop.
I know, but I can confirm for everyone who tuned in to part one that at least you did have sufficient pie and cake. That much I do know.
Well, I do have a bit of a sweet tooth, like I mentioned last week, but yes, and now I have to add more than a few miles to the workout every day.
Not me. I call that winterizing. I'm just getting ready.
Exactly. Maybe we can get that subsidized under the IRA for additional insulation. But yes, grateful for this office turkey day because there is so much to prepare for and get ready in advance of next year. And so we can absolutely not complain.
It's true. We are, by no stretch, we are complaining because it is so exciting because there's so much to do as we get ready for 2025. But all jokes aside, a special thank you to everyone who joined us for the premiere of part one of this special featuring Assembly OSM, the company that is pioneering the path to tackling the climate and housing crises head on. And boy, do we have a show for you today with part two.
That's right. We watched the live premiere of part one with our viewers from across the world as we toured Assembly OSM's absolutely beautiful first building in historic district of Fort Greene, Brooklyn. We spoke with community members and they asked questions about the building and the company. They shared their experiences and reacted to the incredible work that Assembly OSM is doing.
And the response to that first part of the special was just amazing. And we are so excited tonight to dive even deeper with part two of this Thanksgiving special. And again, being focused in on the home and what makes a house a sustainable and healthy home. We hope all of you are listening in from the comfort of your own home with family and friends.
Absolutely. And maybe a little more full after such a big feast. But before we get into all of that, let's remind everyone why we're here and what is Planet First Action and what it's all about.
Exactly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That is absolutely right. Thank you, Ryan. This show, Planet First Action, is not about what divides us. It's not about debating science or debating across the political aisle. No, it's actually about what unites us and that common ground in which we find ourselves as it relates to the pace of change. Facing challenges on a global scale, Planet First Action is focused in on those new solutions, new technologies, and new jobs, which are already here.
Exactly, and learning from leaders on the front lines to better prepare ourselves and our communities for that change. And it says it in our name. It's all about action. Learning from those who are driving action forward and understanding what are the implications for all of us and to inform our own actions and our choices.
Exactly. And those technologies, those solutions, they range across every sector of society and the economy. But for this Thanksgiving special, as we said, we are focused in on the future of homes, featuring one of the pioneering companies that is already building them, Assembly OSM. And in part one of this special, this past Wednesday, we had the immense privilege of touring their prototype in Brooklyn, guided by Alexandra Donovan, Assembly OSM's head of design and innovation, and Eddie Palka, lead for the housing lab at Columbia University and project manager at Assembly OSM. And it was amazing to be in that building, to tour it, to see it firsthand how Assembly OSM are not figuratively, but quite literally building the future of homes, and to do it in a way that makes them incredibly sustainable and so much more healthy to live in.
That's right. And it really is incredible what they've been able to accomplish. And it's in areas you might never think about. Beyond being all electric and what that means in terms of eliminating noxious fumes that have been proven to be harmful to your health, it's things like choosing materials that don't off-gas VOCs, for which by the uninitiated means volatile organic compounds, and that again benefits your health. And also so many other different ways too. By doing off-site modular construction, they've been able to reduce a ton of waste, and it also eliminates all the noise and air pollution that conventional construction brings. And think about the impact of nearly eliminating that whole process. Just think about it for a little bit, how that benefits local communities so they're not disrupted, all day long for months on end by this nearby construction. And you know that New Yorkers in particular are very happy about that.
Exactly. It's hard to make New Yorkers happy.
That is so true. And to be honest, since touring that building and discussing it with Alex and Eddie, what's been just jumping out to me is truly incredible is just how much time you save by doing it this way and how quickly they can stack a building. And the fact that this was actually built in downtown Brooklyn, in literally a day, 24 hours. Just watch this video. It is truly amazing to see.
It is remarkable. It really is, to see that kind of pace. I mean, that is something you might expect to see on a container ship at a port, not something you would ever expect to see when it comes to new construction projects in the middle of New York City. I mean, think about that. Everything had to go right to make it seamless in that dense urban environment. I mean, to do that in 24 hours, we cannot emphasize that enough. One day. If you look into it, according to New York City real estate experts, the average construction process by conventional means for a typical New York City brownstone is anywhere between 9 and 18 months, never mind a day. And Assembly OSM stacked their first prototype, that building on St. Felix, that street in Brooklyn, in just 24 hours. I mean, that is a tremendous achievement.
Absolutely, especially when you start thinking you can't even get across Manhattan sometimes in under 2 hours. Just thinking of actually pulling a building across all of Manhattan and into Brooklyn, it's, really astonishing, honestly. And during part 1, and if you haven't had a chance to go see it yet, please be sure to go and check it out. You all got to see what the space looks like as they were putting the final touches and getting ready for the last inspections. And now here's a sneak peek of what that incredible space looks like as a home.
I mean, yeah, the whole thing is just beautiful. 2 duplexes that each had parking. And if you know anything about New York City, you know that that is absolutely unheard of, to have your own parking these days. And also to have rooftop access. I mean, and just the building itself, just really well-appointed bathrooms, and incredibly comfortable and beautiful living and dining area. And the kitchen, I mean, I can't say enough about the kitchen. And those bedrooms, how bright and spacious they were, they have done something truly incredible there. And it's funny, I don't know, it's a bit reminiscent of, maybe it's better said to be an evolution of what it used to be like to order a home through the Sears catalog. We'll see, though, I don't know, we'll see how many Gen Z have any idea what that is.
Yeah, really, that dates me a little bit. But it also just makes me think about how much of my life I have been missing looking for parking. And now that we've toured the building, we are off to meet the man behind the vision and the mission of Assembly OSM, Chief Executive Officer Andrew Staniforth.
I know. We're on the way, and it is incredible. And in terms of an introduction, we can hardly do any better than his own team. Just listen to what Alex and Eddie had to say in part 1.
I mean, Andrew has an amazing depth of knowledge in not only development, but New York real estate, and also in innovation. He worked for Sidewalk Labs at Google on the Toronto Waterfront District, also in CLT and Mass Timber. And so he's incredibly ambitious. He's incredibly connective. He always says that a rising tide lifts all boats. And so he's very much working across other companies and other entities to make sure we're all collaborating as much as we can.
Yeah, I mean, he's a delightful guy to work for and to know. And I think, as Alex is saying, he has such a depth of knowledge, again, from like the real estate and the tech perspective, and can dive right in, talking with architects, engineers, and like really get into the weeds when necessary and helpful. And really just has that like wide breadth of knowledge that I don't know how he got it, but he has it.
And it's true. Andrew Staniforth is really a force of nature. He has that deep knowledge across sectors, remarkable leadership, and the ability to just light up a room and draw everyone into the conversation. We saw that firsthand at our event in partnership with Bernstein Private Wealth Management earlier this year. He truly is one of a kind.
I know. He's magnetic. The way he draws you in and just makes things so simple and understandable. He could talk and just get you to pay attention and to learn, and just like no one else. It's really incredible what he's able to do. And it's not just how well he communicates and speaks, it's really his leadership and his track record that he brings to Assembly OSM. Because under his leadership, they've raised tens of millions of dollars. And their second project in East Harlem was just awarded NYSERDA's Building of Excellence Award this year. And it's no surprise, because Andrew Staniforth boasts a remarkable career, starting with development across residential, retail, and commercial projects with that focus on public-private partnerships, then going on to Google's Sidewalk Labs, where he helped design the plans for the first city to be built from the internet up, And going on from that, he has developed over 1 million square feet in Manhattan. Think about that. 1 million square feet in the hardest real estate market in the world, in Manhattan. That is what he has done. And he is continuing to push boundaries now at Assembly OSM. And I have to say that Andrew, with that career, with what he's done, it is just not only a tremendous privilege for Ryan and I and the whole team to have him joining us here on the stage momentarily, but really a tremendous privilege to just call him not only a colleague, but really a friend.
Absolutely, Jay. And in just a moment, Andrew's going to join us here on this special stage at the one and only Newlab here in Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is just an amazing place to be. They really cannot stop winning and gaining international recognition for all those success.
Exactly. It is the most amazing place to be having these types of conversations because they are one of a kind. They can't stop succeeding. And it's wonderful to see them getting the recognition that they deserve. Because under Newlab CEO Cam Lawrence's leadership, Newlab was just named as Deep Tech Venture Platform of the Year by FDI Insider. And it's no surprise, and it is fully deserved. From mobilizing for the war effort to now mobilizing to fight the biggest challenges of our time, the Brooklyn Navy Yard has a special place in history and in our collective future. And for many of you, for those of you who went and participated in Climate Week NYC this year, just maybe you were lucky enough to be at Newlab on Thursday for their New Climate Futures event. You know exactly what we're talking about when we say that. To be in that space, it's almost rarefied air. It is an energy that you get just by stepping foot on site at Newlab. And if you haven't been there yet, you absolutely need to make a point of getting yourself there to check it out, to see what we are talking about, because we promise you, once you've seen it firsthand, you will not be the same. And in the meantime, if you haven't, go check out their website at newlab.com because there is just so much incredible work that they are pushing forward.
Newlab's success is growing across the country and really spreading across the world. They are the name to know when it comes to innovation, starting from the Brooklyn Navy Yard and then their second location on Ford's billion-dollar Mobility Innovation District in Detroit, to their hubs in Louisiana and Uruguay. And then finally, they're expanding into MENA. They are truly unstoppable.
And Newlab and its member companies serve as a model, an example to so many. Just as Cam Lawrence himself really is such a mentor for Ryan and myself, with his brilliant leadership and how he is applying his stellar career to the challenges of today, his vision and his know-how to not only see around the corner, but know what it takes to get there. I mean, you cannot ask for a better mentor. And now, to be talking with Andrew about their groundbreaking solution here at Newlab on this stage, which itself is home to so many of those new technologies being developed by these great minds, these innovators, these job creators that are powering forward the energy transition, reindustrialization, the deployment of these new frontier technologies, and so much more. It is just so fitting to be here. It's just so special.
Absolutely. And when you start thinking about it and look at the bigger picture and you want to really talk about job creation, it is those trends spurred forward by some incredible policies like the Inflation Reduction Act. And then you have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. And of course, CHIPS and Science Act, which, when you start combining all of these wonderful achievements, it has achieved so much economic growth and job creation. According to research by Climate Power, it's made over 330,000 new jobs in the U.S. 330,000. And not only that, it's also contributed to $360 billion in new clean energy investments to date. And it's just getting started.
I know, it's just getting started. It's going to keep going. But for those, don't let that pass you by, that number. Those two numbers specifically, but especially the jobs. Think about what that is. That's not, there's a new job down the street. That's 330,000 jobs in the U.S. That is truly incredible, the achievement by those policies and how it's been put forward by companies like Newlab. But that is not something to take lightly. That is a massive, massive number. And according to the Brookings Institution, not only are those jobs spread across nearly all 50 states, but they pay higher wages on average. And 3/4 of them don't require a 4-year degree, making them so much more accessible. It really is work at the intersection of so many important areas. And with that, I'm just so ready to dive into Assembly OSM with Andrew, because it is leaders like Cam Lawrence and Andrew Staniforth, the accomplishments of Newlab and Assembly OSM, that together they inspire hope, and they instill that belief that you can pick up the baton and carry it forward.
Absolutely. And going back to that idea of intersectionality, It really is the perfect idea that really encapsulates what Assembly OSM is doing and what architecture, frankly, really is. Zahad Hadid, an Iraqi-British architect, remarked that architecture is not only about shelter. Architecture should be able to excite you, to calm you, and to make you think.
That's amazing. It is true. And Juhani Palasma, a Finnish architect and considered by many a leading international figure in contemporary architecture, design, and art culture, shared his vision about how good architecture and good art alike tell us something not only about our society, history, and culture, but also about ourselves. That architecture is not out there, it is a mediation between the world and our minds, and ultimately, that a profound design process eventually makes the patron, the architect, and every occasional visitor in that building a slightly better human being.
It's true. It's so deep, but it's so true. And under Andrew Staniforth's leadership, Assembly OSM is achieving exactly that. And what's more, doing it in a way that actually tackles some of the biggest challenges that we face today with climate change and also the housing crisis. Without further ado, Newlab and Planet First Action welcomes Assembly's OSM CEO, Andrew Staniforth, on stage here at Newlab.
Andrew, yes. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Especially on this hot and sunny day.
I know. Please have a seat.
It is a very warm phone booth all morning.
We know you've got a crazy schedule, and so to just, again, appreciate you taking the time to be here with us and to be having this conversation. No, it really, again, it means a lot to us. As we just shared with the audience, we're so excited for this conversation because you just have a tremendous amount of insights that a lot of stakeholders, whether it's founders, policymakers, community leaders, are all going to be able to benefit from. So we're excited about it.
Yeah, I'm very excited as well. Thank you for having me.
Sure. All right. So before we actually get into some of the more serious questions, let's find out a little bit more about actually what you guys are literally building at Assembly OSM. So tell us kind of what's going on.
Yeah, so Assembly, we build high-rise modular buildings. So think about that as 10 to 30 stories built in a factory, stacked up in major urban markets like New York City. So we are right now at the tail end of our first project down the street in Brooklyn, right here. That was a pilot project, 3 stories, stacked in a single day. And on the heels of that, we're working on a 15-story building up in East Harlem, which is a little bit earlier in the process. Just got through the Department of Buildings, and
Excellent.
We're gearing up execution for the fall.
That's fantastic. And I mean, and on that note of that new building, you've already won a NYSERDA Building of Excellence Award. So congratulations on that. And I mean, tell us more about that award. What does that mean for you as a business? How important that is?
Yeah. So for us, we won the NYSERDA Buildings of Excellence Award, which is basically looking at where the next generation of buildings are going to be and awarding them based on a bunch of criteria. And we are building this 15-story building to passive house standards, to welfare residential standards. It is a building in a disadvantaged community per the state, as well as a building that has a component for affordable housing. So we're tackling a lot of stuff here. And I think as the city looks for precedents for where the next generation of buildings are going to be looking like and how they get constructed, I think they recognize that our approach, while in the early innings, is one of those approaches that is going to be scalable in the future to really make a dent in what their objectives are, which is to house more New Yorkers in a more sustainable way.
That's exactly it. And I think it's amazing because you have Newlab here in Brooklyn. You have, as you mentioned, your first pilot project, an incredible building over at Felix, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, in Brooklyn. Yep. You've also got the first all-electric skyscraper that was built over at Alley Block, which is in Brooklyn as well. It's like everything's happening in Brooklyn. It is the center of innovation, especially here in New York City. And it also speaks to what you just mentioned, that sort of the importance of a number of challenges that we're confronting today. A big one, obviously, is climate action and sustainability. Another area is the housing crisis and actually making sure there is enough housing stock for all of the growing population. You have a stated mission of addressing both of those sort of simultaneously. Talk to us a little bit more about what does that mean for yourself, but also for those communities and municipalities that are thinking about how to deal with both of those things.
Yeah. So we think about the problems that we're going after as twofold, but they're really tightly connected. The housing crisis, where in the US to get to where, we have full housing, millions more units, it's about $3 trillion of development just to get to zero. Right? And then you think about where population growth is going and then extrapolate that problem globally, it's a massive, massive, massive problem. And then you look at what's happening from a climate change perspective, where we now as a society have realized that it's real, it's happening, right? We need to do something about it. But from a real estate perspective, it's so tightly intertwined with climate change because real estate is putting out 40% of greenhouse gas. So when you think about these two problems, right, housing, how are we going to solve this housing crisis and solve this climate crisis? You have to think about them together. And that's why our focus today has really been on cities, because density is one of the tools that you can use to solve both of those, right? Building bigger buildings in places like New York, where from a infrastructure perspective, it can serve a growing population. From a resiliency perspective, there's capital there to ensure that as sea level rise and temperature patterns change, right, we're fortified for that. And so by thinking about these two challenges together, it opens up sort of the pathway for us, which is building buildings in markets like New York and top cities around the world to the highest degrees of sustainability to make a dent in both.
Right. That's absolutely amazing. And it just it brings to mind how incredible that first project must have been. So you have St. Felix,
yeah,
right? So it was literally done in a day.
Yes.
So in my mind, I just imagined someone who went on a business trip, had basically a vacant lot, came back and was like, what is this?
Yes. So it actually, it turned into a little bit of a block party with all the neighbors because they're like, wait, what's going on? And, we ended up having to order sandwiches for everyone on the street because everyone was out there watching what we were doing. But the mods left the factory Friday evening, got staged at the George Washington Bridge, crossed over at midnight, arrived on Hanson Place at 1 a.m. Crane showed up at 3, started stacking at 7, and the crane was coming down by 4:30.
Wow.
So, it went up in a day, but there's a lot of pre-work that went into that, right? And one of the things that we believe with Assembly is the type of startup that we are, which is we build buildings. Very atypical for your startup where you're typically pushing an app and, if things go wrong with our first versions of things, right? We can't push an update, right? Our buildings have to be safe. They have to go up. They have to stack because the barrier or the willingness to have that type of fatal flaw in buildings is zero. So what we had to do in order to get to a place where we knew this building would go up in a single day, we did things like stack it multiple times in the parking lot of the factory to make sure that we knew what was going to happen, that our on-site contractors knew what was going to happen. We knew where the mistakes would be and how to guard against them so that when sort of we went into real production, right? Real mode on that November 11, we knew it would go up. We knew it would connect. We knew everything because we had tested it. And I think this is one of those things that for the type of business we're building, you have to insert these moments of really rapid de-risking in your first projects, because St. Felix in any other manufacturing industry would have been a little pilot project that's hidden from the world, right? You see all of the camouflage cars running around that everyone tries to get like the paparazzi shot of. They don't want the world to see them making their mistakes and learning and moving up the learning curve. Our buildings, we can't hide our buildings, right? There's no way to camouflage that and make it go away. So we're building very much in public. So our first buildings are commercial buildings. People are going to live in them. We have equity partners. Like they're real projects. But on the same side or the other side, they are pilot projects. They're still prototyping. There's a lot of embedded R&D cost in stacking a building multiple times before you do it for real. So this is just a little bit of what we've had to do in terms of how we have built Assembly is think about projects as both real projects moving into that world of commercialization, but also projects are critical R&D to de-risk our approach for future scale down the road.
Wow, that's just amazing. And so when you start really thinking about it, like you guys have such a unique place in the overall market. Yeah. And so how does that really actually unlock like other things that otherwise would be completely inaccessible?
Yeah. So, our position in the overall ecosystem is pretty different, right? Yeah. And I'd say because of that, we have to wear a lot of hats. And that opens up opportunities for things that would be inaccessible, but it also opens up a lot of challenges. I think on one end, because we are a developer, a design builder, a startup that's VC funded, but also debt funded, tied into the government, all of this stuff, it's allowed us to be a little bit more creative in terms of how we're funding our execution and how we think about our roadmap. So, today we've taken on venture capital, we've taken on venture debt, we've taken on project level debt, we've gotten grant money. So we've been able to unlock some of these other, tools that a traditional startup making a SaaS app would not be able to do. But it also comes with the complexity of playing all those pieces together and keeping everything. One of the most critical team members we have is our general counsel, because it all has to, go together really, really tightly.
It's amazing. It's going to be something that resonates with all of the different types of stakeholders that are in the audience, because to your point, there's a lot of different hats you're wearing, yes. And it has insights in terms of the implications for each of those different roles. To what you just mentioned, being a hard tech in a pure sense in building buildings.
Yes.
There is no updates, there's no refreshes, there's no do-overs. It is the building. So it makes sense to what you mentioned of kind of needing to fully de-risk that before you do anything. But another thing that's interesting for perhaps another set of stakeholders or how they're thinking about it, who might also be saying, having heard that, like, why would you build a building multiple times before building it? They're like, it may not make sense, but part of that is also familiarity with the built environment, and especially the New York City real estate market and what it's like to build or try to even get through these streets. Yeah. It also goes to another part of what you all are doing in that sort of capability, which is addressing sort of a third related crisis, which is public health. Yeah. Because you had all of that construction completed in that window of time where normally it takes many, many months. Yeah. And there's a lot of implications that come from that construction. So for the audience that may not be as familiar with the New York City market or just the reality of what it's like, what is that difference that you guys have? Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, New York is not an easy market to build in. It is one that uniquely our team has actually built a lot in. So we sort of know how to navigate Department of Buildings, Department of Transportation, have a lot of relationships there, know that they are actually very good partners if you treat them like partners, not as sort of administrative agents, right? They want to be brought into the process. But, you also have to think about what, as New Yorkers and sort of the administration and political side and governmental side, optimize for, right? Yeah, one of the things that in New York you have to be very cognizant of is like construction impacts so many more people than if you were building in the suburbs. So if you're closing a street for years, which many construction projects have to do, a lane closure, a full street closure, that impacts thousands, if not, it's probably not millions, thousands of people's commutes, daily lives. You think about the dust, all of this stuff is just, the impact is just exponential because of the population density here. What we've been able to do is, if you can think about the impact per unit of time, right? If you can just cut the time in half or even more, that just affects less people, right? So people are like, well, how are you able to get the agencies to sign off on leaving a module in the street for a few hours every day? It's like, this is so much less than a conventional building by orders of magnitude, that they are so willing to help, because this is so different in a positive way than what conventional construction is able to do, that it really has built community support and governmental support for a solution that impacts people so much less.
That's amazing. And I think it goes to the sort of cohesive approach that you have throughout the operations and even the product itself of what the buildings are. that is focused on addressing all of those challenges that we're facing today. And you mentioned this already, but one of the things is that you're an early adopter of Wealth Residential. And so you did that. It was announced at the end of last year, November 15th. And just to give the audience some context, Wealth Residential is an evidence-based, it's first of a kind in terms of the program, but it's an evidence-based, third-party verified certification program designed to transform the way homes are designed, built, and maintained, specifically with that focus on human health and well-being. So obviously, there's a part of that that's important from just being a good corporate citizen. But how else do you think about that program as it relates to the business?
So as it relates to the business, I think one of the things that we've tried to set up within the company is different objectives that may at times be competing, right? And we have a fundamental belief that competitive tension is what breeds creativity. So if you think about a lot of modular companies. Close your eyes, picture a modular building. You're thinking of boxy, low-end building. You don't think the highest degrees of wellness, health, indoor air quality, light, nature, all of that. They seem to be, from a perception perspective, at opposite ends of the spectrum. Also with sustainability, right? People think about wellness and sustainability sometimes as competing, because you want to wrap the building as much as possible, and in wellness you want more outdoor air and stuff like that. When you actually think about and study all of these different competing strategies, they're not actually as much in conflict as the perception is. But holding these standards at high priority within the company creates pathways to solve these problems in new ways, right? So when we have to drive efficiency, time savings, cost savings, but also have to deliver the most sustainable and healthiest building, those create better outcomes for everyone involved, instead of us just optimizing one versus the other. I think one of the hardest things to do when running a startup is to avoid the pendulum swinging, right? You have one really, really important objective, and then 6 months later, you completely switch to a completely different objective, which inevitably happens, but you want to try to minimize that as much as possible. And I think signing up and being part of these certifications helps us avoid some of that pendulum swinging, because you hold both in high regard.
That's fantastic. I want to say that again because I think it's so important for this audience that's listening in. There's two big things that I took away from that. Tell me if there's another.
Sure.
Part of the importance of taking those certifications and those objectives is that it forces the creation of new paths, of new ways of doing things, of finding perhaps a better solution that hasn't been previously treaded as a path.
Yeah.
The other way is, to your point, forcing a sort of stability in the startup environment that requires a committed adherence to certain objectives, even when other priorities come to the top of mind. Yeah. That's a incredibly important advice for founders.
And also quite bold, because to your point, I mean, when you start thinking of startups, you start thinking of, like, you have to pivot.
Oh yeah.
So they're just a natural byproduct of what it is that you have to do as you start to iterate your business.
Yeah.
So, and start thinking about kind of OSM as well. I was thinking about, okay, well, the value props, because there's just so many. I mean, you have the speed of stack, you have basically the award that you're talking about, you have obviously the well program that's going through, the health benefits we just ended up talking about. Like, let's start keeping those in mind and thinking about when you first started fundraising.
Yeah.
Like, when you go and you actually start having to talk to investors, just when we were back at the March event, we started with Tony, we started talking with Jackie about, the importance of being able to tell that story, of being able to convey the fact of what you're really trying to do. And then so help us understand kind of your fundraising journey and how that story has kind of developed over time.
Yeah. So we've raised a lot of capital. And it's funny, we are a relatively capital light business compared to most other modular companies, right? We've raised about 72 million to date. And if you look at some of our other modular peers, they've raised billions. And so we've done a lot with that capital. But the story for us has been really around solving real problems and real big problems. So if you think about sort of like the pre-seed, seed investor like rule of thumb, right? You want to invest behind the team and the TAM, right? And those are, you want a big market and a good team that knows the problem and they're going to pivot accordingly. I think that got us, the first, capital coming into the business. But I think now where we are is we are, raising money and thinking about this path to execution and the roadmap that we built around de-risking fundamental pieces of our business and the pathway to a really, really big market. So I think the team and TAM are still there, but we've now been able to demonstrate with St. Felix, now with 117th, that the value proposition of better, faster, cheaper, more sustainable, more healthy is actually coming true. And with those precedents and with those examples, we're able to raise future capital. I think one of the hardest parts about raising capital for our type of business is we don't fit into a nice, clean box, right? A lot of venture investing is based on pattern matching. So, you think about the sector investors, SaaS investors, vertical SaaS, you have all these very tight niches. There's not an investor group that's like high-rise modular buildings. It's a different category, and we're sort of paving our own way. And I think that creates a harder story to tell because I find myself trying to find what patterns the investor is looking at and trying to fit a box, but we're very different. We're not fitting in any box. So I do think that it is that the type of investor that is looking at Assembly is looking at a big swing and looking at impact, not just in sort of like the social or climate, but like impact on a sector, right? Investors are economic animals. They are biasing towards large returns, large markets, and stuff like that. And if we can tie all of that together for them to understand that, there's $3 trillion of housing that needs to be built just to get to zero. And if we can have a sliver of that, we have a multi-billion-dollar business, right? And if we can stay on our roadmap of showing that building 1 went up, it was great. Building 2 went up, it was great. And we have a path to taking just a slice of that. It's a huge opportunity for everyone. And there are sort of the double bottom line elements that certain investors are very focused on.
Well, it's interesting because, we've talked about this a little bit already, but just to kind of put a finer point on it, and we talked about that as well over at the March event, like how critical is sustainability actually when you start raising capital? Is it a must-have at this point, or is it a nice-to-have? Like, how do actually investors really think about it?
Yeah, so I think on the venture investor side, there are sustainability-focused investors, right? That is part of their mandate, that's part of their thesis, that the tailwinds associated with everything happening around sustainability, governmental regulation is going to make these companies more valuable and more resilient. Then there are non-sustainability focused investors. They look one level down and look at our customers, and they see what's happening from a regulatory perspective on the building side and look at what's happening on the capital market side on the building side and say, well, if Assembly is not focused on sustainability, they're not going to get customers. So it is for them a secondary thing, but still very important because it's the primary driver for our customers looking at new solutions to the way that they're building.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. And again, this is really one of the key things that we're trying to do with Planet First Action is to help that at that translation point between how do investors think versus how are founders and startups thinking versus how are policymakers thinking, so there's better dialogue to enable that action. And so being able to have your insight of how it was for you to get into the investor mindset is incredibly important. I think just to go to that one step further, at the very beginning of the process, when you were saying how do we create this story to make it compelling for these investors, I think there's something we talked about briefly of like how much emphasis on sustainability versus not emphasis when just telling the story, not that it's changing the business, because it's something that you're doing regardless, but how much of the actual pitch deck or that 30-second pitch was really focused on sustainability. I believe you made a pivot at one point to put more emphasis in it and saw an implication as a result.
So I think, if we think about the journey for Assembly, it's been over a decade. We, with Shop, when I was at Forest City, we built 461 Dean, which was the tallest modular tower in North America. That project was not a sustainability-focused project. It was a project looking to help build more housing in New York City. We were doing Atlantic Yards, Pacific Park at the time. and the DNA of building more efficiently was sort of there. I think when we went out for our Series A and we were thinking about where the world had gone between sort of 2011 and 2021, sustainability, climate change had moved way higher on the list of things to think about and was embedded in what we were doing, because we were thinking about efficiency. Sustainability and efficiency are very connected because you want to eliminate waste. You want to, build very efficient envelopes to minimize the HVAC system. So they were very sort of much a part of it. But that's when we started studying how close are we to delivering Passive House just with our baseline systems. And we're like, oh, wow, like we're right here. Like, let's just go for it. And then we started realizing, wow, like we accidentally had built a wildly sustainable product and approach that with just a little bit of push was literally the most sustainable you could do. And so that's when we started putting resources towards it and really understanding what we had to do and what we wanted to focus on. So that's sort of how we started diving into the Passive House, WELL certification. And when we started talking about that, we got a different pool of investors during the Series A. And Fifth Wall's climate tech team was the one that led our Series A. And I think at that time, they had really honed in on the thesis that decarbonizing construction needed to happen. And who were the players with the right approach to do that? And I think we were a major part of that thesis, especially in the urban and high-rise markets, because doing decarbonization is very difficult. Doing decarbonization at the scale of building in New York City is even harder. And we had sort of had a pathway of doing both of those.
It's so interesting, and it's funny because it brings us back to the conversation we were having with Tony in one of the previous episodes of how the markets are transforming. Because there is concerted, explicit action to make things more sustainable, but at the same time, there is just other market forces of whether it's purely the bottom line or, as you mentioned, trying to be as efficient as possible that ends up bringing you to the same place. And so it's sort of this interesting combination of how the startups and companies that are building new products are pushing us there one way or another, and also the investors, as you mentioned, over the last decade, how that's shifted in terms of their mindset. But switching gears from the fundraising to now kind of operating as a business and getting into later rounds. One of the things that was so compelling that you shared for the audience at the March event, really focused on that financial materiality of sustainability, was that idea that it's not just about raising the capital, it's also about how you structure it. And the importance of structuring just really being one of the things that you can solve a lot of problems with if you do it well. So I'd love to just, again, dive back into that for this broad audience.
It's a little bit, I had to go back to Finance 101 on sort of like the cost of capital, right? And how do you minimize your cost of capital using all the different levers that are possible. Venture capital is very expensive capital, probably the most expensive capital. There are cheaper sources of capital. Grant funding is probably the cheapest, right? And what we've tried to do, because our business does require capital, is think about what pieces of the business can be funded by which sources of capital. And I think this is going to be something that's going to be even more pronounced as we scale the business going forward. But as I mentioned, we have venture capital, we have venture debt, we have project level debt, we have grant funding. All of those blend our cost of capital down. But as we go forward, right, the precedent that everyone talks about in terms of like non-dilutive funding sources is the Tesla Department of Energy, where they got close to $500 million to accelerate their development of the Model S, right? We think about our next stage as a company is thinking about what are those non-dilutive, whether it's debt, whether it's grants, that will take us from St. Felix and 117th to 5 facilities across the US, running at full capacity, doing $2-3 billion a year in top line revenue. What is that capital that we need to raise? And I think there is a point where the use of venture capital, which is very good at funding risk and overcoming the guinea pig risk of doing something for the first time, you end the need for that because you've reached a sufficiently de-risked point, and then you can move into other non-dilutive funding sources. I do think that what's happening from a funding perspective within the government is also very helpful from a timing perspective with how much capital is going towards sustainability and decarbonizing, that as we get to a place where we can sort of access much larger quantums of that type of capital, we will have also reached that de-risking moment within the business to make it appropriate to take on that type of capital.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you start thinking about it, because when you say, okay, well, look, I need to go out and go fundraise. What that actually takes is that, again, it's a massive amount of risk, and typically what that requires is actually data to support your conclusions. In climate specifically, there's not a lot of data. So you actually brought up a really interesting point actually at our last event about how you actually look for precedent in order to help actually establish kind of the conclusions that you have. But tell our audience actually, because I mean, this is a concerted problem that basically we get so much questions about. Like, how do you actually go about doing that? How do you actually choose the right kinds of precedents to actually look for? And then how do you actually structure it in a way that actually investors will actually like appeal to?
Yeah, it's hard because as I said, like we don't fit a perfect box, right? There is no precedent for what we're doing, but there is precedent in other industries, right? So, we've looked at our company similar to how an OEM in aerospace or automotive works, right? Our tiered supply chain, all of that. How have they funded different transformations in their business, right? How have they funded the scale up of a supply chain? How have they funded development of new cars and stuff like that? And that's one lens. The other precedent is looking at how buildings get built, right? Buildings get built with a large amount of project level debt. They use special purpose entities to do that, to guard against sort of parent guarantee risk and stuff like that. So there's a precedent there for project-based finance. There's also a precedent in like infrastructure finance as it relates to like power plants, where as we think about our facility expansion, it's very similar to how you could do a new power plant with an offtake agreement, where the committed revenue allows you to finance the capital expense of opening that new plant, right? So if we think about the speed at which we can open a facility, it's within the design timeline of a project. So let's say we're entering the Bay Area market. We sign up on a project. It's an end-to-end 2-year development project. Let's call it half design, half factory and on-site. Within that first year of design, we only need 6 months to open up a new factory. So you sign up on the project, you have committed revenue on that project, you then go to the bank and say, hey, I have an offtake agreement for this new facility that I want to open. They use that offtake agreement as collateral to finance that facility, and now you have non-dilutive funding your expansion. Now, to get to that place, you need a track record of building so that they know that that offtake agreement is real and stuff like that. You have to be a lot more credit-worthy as a company to do that. But there's a precedent there that's used for windmills and power plants and solar farms and stuff like that you can apply to our type of business as well, even though it's a completely different industry.
Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us for part 2 of this Thanksgiving special. And we are sure that you all can see now why Ryan and I were so excited for this conversation with Andrew Staniforth, the CEO of Assembly OSM.
That's right. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And be sure to hit the thumbs up and share this episode with family and friends. And of course, be sure to subscribe for upcoming episodes, including the third and final part of this Thanksgiving special.
Exactly, because in part 3, we'll get even more insights from our conversation with Andrew, and then we'll also get to hear from community members themselves outside of their pilot project in Brooklyn. You are not going to want to miss it. I mean, here's just a little sneak peek from conversations with the community.
There is hope for those buildings yet. And as you can see, Exhibit A, like, if this thing was really built in a day, then we could start right now. You know what I mean? Like, it's always a state of now. I have a question for you about those windows, right? What was the architect's vision for the windows? Let's talk about, like, the border. Let's talk about its coloration.
And for those who want to learn more right now about the incredible work that Assembly OSM is doing, you can head over to their website at assemblyosm.com. And frankly, you should, because it's really fascinating.
It is. I mean, there's so much more that we couldn't even fit into this episode. There's a lot to dig into. They are doing some amazing work. And again, as always, you can head over to planetfirstaction.com as well for more insights, more content, to catch up on previous episodes. We hope to see you there. We hope you join the Planet First Action community. And as Ryan said, be sure to subscribe. And again, we have so much appreciation for the Newlab team for being able to be here on this stage to have this series. And as we mentioned at the top of the episode, be sure to check them out if you haven't already. It's newlab.com. They are doing incredible work. They are the name to know. Go and learn more about Cam Lawrence and the team, what the amazing things that they're doing with Newlab.
Exactly. Because after the Thanksgiving special, we'll be rounding out Planet First Action's 2024 series with some incredible episodes featuring innovations across sectors and across continents, and truly, truly, truly inspirational.
So thank you again so much for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe and share. And we hope you enjoy appropriate amounts of Thanksgiving leftovers this weekend before we see you at the same time tomorrow for part 3. If you're traveling and you can't watch the film show, you can also listen in on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify.
Absolutely. So thank you all so much for joining us. Good night. Bonsoir.
Bonsoir. À demain.